When Officer Wagner was murdered, his police K-9 dogs fight for justice left everyone in tears. With his partner gone, Rex embarks on a relentless pursuit to uncover the truth, sensing something sinister that others missed. As corruption within the police force unravels, Rex becomes the key to exposing a conspiracy that reaches the highest ranks. In a race against time, Rex's instincts and unwavering loyalty lead to a heart-stopping showdown that will change everything. Officer Thomas Wagner's boots hit the pavement in a steady rhythm. The low rumble of his patrol car's engine, the only sound as he and K-9 Rex circled the city block. The sun had dipped low behind the buildings, casting long shadows that stretched down alleyways, unnoticed by most. The evening air carried the scent of asphalt and fresh rain, sharp and tingling. Rex, his lean, powerful body gliding beside Wagner, remained alert, his nose twitching, ears pricked for any hint of trouble. The city was quiet, too quiet, but they had seen this before. Something always stirred when the day turned to night. They had just passed an old convenience store when the call came through. Possible burglary in progress. Suspect fleeing. Wagner's hand tightened on the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the streets ahead. Rex's nostrils flared in unison, ready for the chase. As they turned onto another street, the sight of a figure darting across the road caught Wagner's attention. It was brief, like a shadow slipping between buildings, but Rex had already spotted it, a low growl vibrating in his throat. "Let's go, Rex," Wagner muttered under his breath, and the dog's eyes met his, understanding the order without a word. The car skidded to a stop at the edge of the alley. Wagner threw the door open, his hand on Rex's collar, and the dog shot forward, his paws drumming against the wet pavement. The air was thick with the smell of grease and garbage, mixed with a faint odor of fear. The sound of a distant door slamming echoed off the brick walls. The chase led them deep into the alley, the narrow path barely lit by a flickering street lamp. The suspect's footsteps were fast, but Rex was faster. His muscles rippled beneath his sleek coat, and his determination burned in his eyes. The dog's instincts guided him, every step sure, every movement calculated. The suspect, realizing he was cornered, spun around to face them. His hand moved swiftly, pulling something from his jacket, but before he could aim, Rex was on him. The suspect grunted as the dog's teeth found the sleeve of his coat, dragging him down to the ground. Wagner was already there, cuffing the man, his movements swift and practiced. But then, a sharp, sudden crack shattered the night stillness. Rex's fur stood on end as Wagner dropped to his knees, his face paling in shock. A streak of blood blossomed from his chest, staining his uniform. The officer's grip on the suspect's arm slackened as he collapsed forward. His breathing was shallow, ragged, the sharp scent of metal and salt filling the air. Rex's nose twitched, a low growl vibrating in his throat. The weight of what had happened hit him all at once. He looked at his handler, the man who had always been there, his protector, his partner. But now, the man was still, his body beginning to sag with the weight of the injury. Panic coursed through the dog's veins. He pressed his nose against Wagner's hand, his fur bristling as his mind whirled in confusion. The officers and paramedics were already arriving, but they moved too slowly, their actions distant and detached. The suspect was pulled away, handcuffed and secured by two officers, but Rex barely noticed. His focus was solely on Wagner. The man he trusted was fading, his breaths too soft, too weak. No, Rex's instinct screamed, though he could not voice them. The world seemed to blur as the flashing lights of the ambulance reflected off the damp walls. Time slowed, stretching into painful moments as Rex watched them carry Wagner's body away. He was left in the cold, the scent of blood still hanging thick in the air. The alley, once a place of routine, now felt like a prison. Days passed, but the dog could not forget. He wandered the police station like a restless ghost, never leaving the place where his partner had fallen. He returned again and again to the alley, his paws scraping the concrete, his nose desperate for any trace of the scent that had once been so familiar. He growled, eyes narrowed as he scanned the shadows. He had to find it. Something wasn't right, but no one understood. Not the detectives, not the officers, and certainly not the people who had promised to take care of him now that his partner was gone. Dr. Liz Monroe, a behavioral expert, was called in after weeks of frustration. She had dealt with dogs before, dogs who could sense things beyond human understanding. But Rex was different. She was not easily intimidated, but something about the dog's stare sent a chill crawling up her spine. His gaze was locked on the window, watching intently as officers came and went, his tail stiff with unease. "You know something, don't you?" she muttered softly, more to herself than to him. Rex turned his head, just enough to meet her eyes. She could see it now. Something in his stare, the way his body trembled with tension, the low growl that rumbled from deep within his chest. "Let's see what you've got." "Rex," she said, kneeling in front of him, her hands steady, but her mind racing. The answers were there, somewhere beneath the surface. Rex had witnessed something that the rest of them had missed. She watched carefully as Rex began pacing. There was no sign of fear in his movements, just an overwhelming need to understand. His eyes shifted toward the door, and then back to the window again. Liz took out a notepad, scribbling her observations. She'd seen this behavior before with dogs, but never to this extent. Rex was more than just a companion. He was trying to tell her something. "Follow me," Liz said, after a long moment of silent observation. The dog's ears perked up. His muscles tensed, as though he was ready to move at any moment. His paws scraped against the floor as he turned and led her out of the room, toward the parking lot. Liz, with a slight frown, followed. Outside, Rex stopped at the door leading to the alley. His eyes narrowed again, fixating on something unseen. Liz stood still, watching him with a mixture of disbelief and intrigue. Rex was no longer just a dog grieving his handler. He was searching for answers. The detective who had been on the case approached, his expression guarded. "What are you doing here?" Liz didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched the way Rex's body stiffened. It was as if he had found something. "There's something you missed," she said quietly. At that moment, the wind shifted, carrying the faintest trace of an unfamiliar scent, one that made her skin crawl. The faint smell of cheap cologne, masking something far more pungent. A mixture of sweat, fear, and gunpowder seeped into the air, thickening the atmosphere. Liz's fingers clenched around her notepad. Her eyes darted across the alley, her senses heightened. There was a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable, like a warning she could not yet fully interpret. Rex's gaze never wavered, his tail rigid behind him, and his nose twitched as if he had pieced together a puzzle only he could see. He was no longer simply a grieving companion. He was a silent witness, trying to show them the hidden truth beneath the surface. Detective Myers frowned, glancing between Liz and the dog. "What exactly is it you think you found?" Liz's voice dropped lower. "Rex isn't just reacting to grief anymore. He knows something the rest of us are missing." The detective let out a sharp breath, not fully convinced but not ready to dismiss her either. "We've been over this. There's nothing here but the usual junk. A man was shot. We know that." But Liz didn't reply. Instead, she observed Rex closely. His gaze had shifted toward the corner of the alley, his body tensing as his eyes fixed on something far beyond the reach of the others. There was no question now. He was searching for something or someone. Myers' eyes followed Rex's line of sight, but saw nothing. Just the dim outline of buildings, a stray cat darting across the street. Still, the discomfort in his chest grew, an unsettling sensation he couldn't quite explain. "Maybe he's just confused," Myers muttered, though the words rang hollow in his mouth. Rex's growl deepened, more than just a sound. It was a warning, guttural and certain. Liz looked back at the detective, her face suddenly more serious. "It's not just grief," she insisted. "He's avoiding certain people. He's not confused." The detective hesitated. "What do you mean?" Liz took a step forward, feeling the subtle shift of tension in the air. Rex's growl subsided as he turned his attention to another corner of the alley, his body rigid with concentration. Liz's eyes followed his gaze to a figure now entering the precinct, Lieutenant Carson. "It's him," Liz murmured, her voice tight. "Rex is reacting to him. He's not just another officer." Myers felt his breath catch. Something about Carson had always felt off, but he had brushed it aside. Now, the unease bloomed in his chest, tightening into something far more real. "Carson, you think he's involved?" Liz didn't answer immediately. She simply nodded, a faint understanding settling over her. She had been right all along, but now there was no denying it. There was something hidden in plain sight. The investigation had always seemed too clean, too simple. But Rex had seen through it, with a clarity that no one else had. For the next few days, Rex's behavior grew more deliberate. The dog began to avoid certain parts of the precinct, his sharp gaze focusing on specific officers as they passed by, his body stiffening with each one. It was almost as if he was creating a mental map of who was involved and where they could be found. His eyes never softened as they landed on Carson, his movements tense, as if warning of something dark lurking beneath the surface. Detective Myers was growing more unsettled by the day. The leads he had been following began to feel like they were leading nowhere, while Rex's actions seemed to tell a different story altogether. It was clear that Rex had witnessed something far beyond what anyone had originally thought. Late one night, Myers pulled Liz aside in the break room, her face lit by the harsh glow of a single overhead light. Rex sat quietly by the door, his eyes scanning the hallway outside. "All right," Myers said, his voice low. "We'll follow the dog's lead. We can't keep ignoring this." He glanced at Rex. "Let's test him. We'll put Carson in front of him and see how he reacts." Liz didn't reply right away. She had grown used to following Rex's lead, but the thought of provoking him was uneasy. Yet, she knew it was necessary. The dog's instincts had been right before. There was no more room for doubt. The next morning, Rex was brought into a room with a handful of officers present. Carson, ever the calm figure, stood at the back, observing with an air of indifference. Myers stood next to Liz, his arms folded, waiting for the moment Rex would make his move. Rex's eyes flicked over each officer before landing on Carson. The dog's nostrils flared, his body coiling, and for a moment, the room held its breath. Without a sound, Rex began to growl, low at first, then louder, more insistent, the tension in his muscles palpable. The hairs on the back of Myers' neck stood up. Carson's eyes narrowed, and a slight shift in his posture caught Liz's attention. He wasn't worried. He was watching Rex carefully, as if trying to gauge how much the dog knew. "What's this supposed to prove?" Carson asked, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. Liz ignored him. "We're just observing." The room was still. Rex's focus never wavered, his stare locked on Carson like a predator's. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, Rex lunged, not at Carson, but at the deputy standing beside him, snapping his jaws close enough to send the officers stumbling backward. The room erupted in chaos. Officers scrambled to restrain the dog, but Myers' eyes remained fixed on Carson, watching as the lieutenant's calm mask slipped for just a second. His eyes widened in alarm. "This isn't just about the murder, is it?" Liz said softly, stepping forward, her gaze sharp. Carson straightened, trying to compose himself. "You've got no proof," he said coldly, but the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him. Rex's behavior had unlocked something hidden beneath the surface, and the pieces began to fall into place. The cover-up was bigger than anyone could have imagined. Carson and his colleagues were involved in something far more dangerous, something that could tear apart the very foundation of the department. That night, Myers and Liz pored over files, searching for connections. The fluorescent lights of the station flickered overhead, buzzing softly in the quiet room. The scent of stale coffee lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of paper and ink. As Liz flipped through page after page, her eyes sharpened. Each document they examined added another layer to the puzzle they were piecing together. The more they uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Records of meetings between high-ranking officers and known gang members surfaced, sprinkled with references to illegal arms deals and bribes. Wagner had been getting closer to something dangerous before he had been killed. "This is it," Liz whispered, scanning through a ledger detailing payments made under false names. "He was digging into this before he died." Myers leaned in, his brow furrowing. He wasn't just investigating street crime. He was uncovering something much darker. He reached out, turning the page with a deliberate hand. "I knew it wasn't just about a simple murder." The next lead took them to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The air outside was cold, the smell of exhaust from nearby trucks mixing with the sharp scent of damp earth and metal. Rex, ever watchful, paced around them, his nose twitching in the wind. The hairs along his back stood up, his instincts on edge. The building loomed in front of them, a silhouette of peeling paint and broken windows. Inside, the air felt thick, stagnant, like the room had been holding its breath for years. The faint sound of rats scurrying in the shadows echoed through the vast emptiness. The smell of dust and rust mingled with something far sharper, a metallic tang of gunpowder, as if the building itself had absorbed the secrets it was meant to keep. Rex's nose flared. He moved ahead, his body tense, and led the way into the dimly lit interior. His footsteps echoed on the concrete floor, reverberating through the hollow space. Liz's eyes scanned the room, her breath steady as she processed the vast amount of crates stacked along the walls. And then they saw it, a row of crates marked with a familiar insignia, a symbol they had seen before on some of the weapons records. The crates were filled with heavy-duty firearms, their metallic surfaces gleaming in the low light, untouched and hidden away like dirty secrets. "Damn," Myers muttered under his breath. "We've got them." But Liz wasn't done. She moved to the back of the warehouse, where a set of documents lay scattered on a table. They were hastily abandoned, still wet with ink. As Liz picked one up, a name caught her eye: Lieutenant Carson. There it was, plain as day. Carson's name on a receipt for a large transaction of weapons, signed off by a known arms dealer. "This is it. Carson's involved in this," she said, her voice firm. The weight of the discovery settled heavily on her shoulders. Myers cursed under his breath. "He's been behind all of this, hasn't he?" All this time, Wagner was getting too close to the truth. The conspiracy had been uncovered, and it was far worse than anyone had expected. Rex had been the key all along, his behavior and instincts guiding them toward the pieces they'd missed. The days that followed were marked by increasing danger. Carson, realizing the walls were closing in, began to take drastic measures. The precinct erupted into turmoil as officers became tangled in internal affairs investigations. The pressure mounted, and with it came threats. One evening, as Liz and Myers dug deeper into the growing web of corruption, the flicker of the overhead light in their office gave way to a knock at the door. Myers opened it to reveal Rex, his body tense, his eyes flashing with alertness. The dog moved to the middle of the room, his gaze fixed on the far corner. A moment later, the door swung open again, but this time, it wasn't a friendly face. A man stepped into the room, his face obscured by a dark mask. He pulled a gun from his jacket. Liz's heart skipped a beat. Before she could react, Rex was on him. The dog leapt forward with speed and force, knocking the assassin to the ground. The man's gun skittered across the floor, just out of reach. Rex's teeth were bared, his body rigid as he growled, standing protectively between Liz and the man. Myers quickly grabbed his own weapon, his hand steady as he aimed at the assailant. "Stay down," he barked. Rex's protective instincts were spot on. The assassin scrambled to his feet, but Rex lunged again, this time pinning him to the floor with a force that left the man gasping for breath. The room filled with the stench of sweat and fear as Liz rushed to the door. "Get back. He's not going anywhere." She motioned for Myers to stay back. Myers grabbed the handcuffs, securing the man quickly, while Rex never took his eyes off him, his growls still echoing through the room. "Who sent you?" Myers demanded, his voice cold. The man's eyes darted around the room, sweat beading on his forehead. But before he could answer, a familiar voice interrupted. "Not today." Lieutenant Carson stepped into the room, his eyes cold as they swept over the scene. But there was no sign of the calm demeanor he usually exuded. His eyes were narrowed, his jaw set tightly. "You're too late," Liz said, her voice steady despite the tension that coiled between them. "We've got the proof, Carson. It's all here." Carson's gaze flickered to Rex, and a small, almost imperceptible flicker of panic crossed his face before he masked it with indifference. "Careful, Monroe," Carson warned, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't know who you're dealing with." But Liz wasn't afraid anymore. She knew the game was over. The pieces were in place. As the night fell, Rex's behavior became more erratic, his agitation growing as he began barking in the direction of Carson's office. The dog's restlessness was a clear sign that the end of the investigation was near. Myers and Liz exchanged a look, and they knew it was time. They had one shot at this. Together, they gathered the evidence, their footsteps heavy with purpose as they made their way to the final confrontation. The warehouse near the docks loomed before them, isolated, silent, the only sound being the faint crash of distant waves against the shore. Carson and his associates were planning their escape, but they weren't going anywhere. Rex led the way, his body taut with tension. They could hear voices from inside, muffled but urgent. And then, as they neared the entrance, Carson appeared, his eyes wild, his hand reaching for a weapon. "Get down!" Myers shouted, but Rex was already in motion. The dog leapt forward, faster than anyone could react, cornering Carson with a single move. "Don't try it," Liz said, her voice calm, yet firm. Carson's gun was aimed at Rex, but the dog moved with precision, avoiding the bullet with a speed that left Carson off balance. In the end, it was Carson who was trapped, his gun now useless as the detectives closed in, securing him and the rest of the officers involved in the conspiracy. With Carson and his crew finally behind bars, the precinct began to rebuild. The corruption that had poisoned the department was eradicated, but the scars would remain. Rex was hailed as a hero, his loyalty, bravery, and sharp instincts bringing justice to the city. Yet, in the quiet moments, the dog's eyes still held a sadness, a grief that no amount of praise could heal. That evening, as the last rays of sunlight faded into the horizon, Rex stood by Officer Wagner's grave, his fur ruffled by the soft, cool breeze. The scent of fresh earth mingled with the air, but to Rex, it was a bitter reminder of the one he had lost. His body, once strong and full of purpose, now felt fragile, as though every step was weighed down by the absence of the man who had been his everything. He leaned his head gently against the grave, the cold stone pressing into his fur, as if trying to feel the warmth of his partner one last time. The wind whispered through the trees, but all Rex could hear was the silence that had filled the void in his heart. The case was closed, the truth uncovered, but the cost was too great. Rex remained there long into the night, a loyal companion who had fought for justice. Yet in the end, all he had was the memory of a bond that would never fade, even if the world moved on without them.